Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. I'm your host, Brian Perez, and we are here live on this Wednesday afternoon to talk to you guys. What do you want to talk about? Give us a call with your questions at 888-564-6173. That's 888-564-6173. You can also watch us on Facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective and on YouTube. Go to the YouTube channel of our flagship station in Southern California, KWAVE 107.9. You can just go to kwave.com and click the YouTube banner there at the top. With me today in the studio, author and apologist Dr. Bobby Conway. Yes, in the studio, not on the Bobby cam. Bobby is here yesterday and today and tomorrow. And
John,
man,
yes.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Real
Hello?
fast.
Is this mic on? Is this mic on?
Dude fest.
Man, these guys are so happy to see each other, as you can tell.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't mean they don't want to hear from you. I mean, they could probably just talk amongst themselves for the next hour. But,
I love Bobby.
yes.
Bobby's like the best.
I love John. John's like the best.
Bobby and a stack of pancakes, perfect combo.
Oh,
That's
wow.
right.
Yeah, that's quite
John
a number.
and a breakfast burrito.
Yeah. That's all you need.
That's right. That's all you need.
888-564-6173 is the number to call. We've got some open lines right now, so take one before they all fill up. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. And we'll start with some questions that were sent in on Facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective, but that is not the best way to get your question answered because you might have to wait weeks or months or years to get your question answered. So give us a call at 888-564-6173. By the way, if you have a question about COVID or the vaccine or anything like that, save it for tomorrow because we've got Dr. Lou Wing coming into the studio tomorrow with Bobby and Brian Broderson. They'll be talking about that, and maybe we'll open up the phone lines. Not sure what we're going to do yet, but those type of questions, just save them for tomorrow, unless it's the question that we get all the time. Is the COVID vaccine the mark of the beast? No. Next question. All right, but let's go to Facebook now. Here's one from Medina. When the Bible says to prepare for Jesus' return, I understand he meant spiritually. But can you explain how else to prepare? Do we stock up physically, like with food and water, or protection? So can you please provide an overview of preparing for the return of Christ? John, what would you say?
Well, I would say that what we want to do is prepare spiritually, as she mentioned. You know, when you read the exhortations in the New Testament, that Jesus and the apostles, when they talked about preparing, they talked about having a life that is consistent with the ways of Jesus. And so, for example, in Romans chapter 13, Paul talks about how that we should live a life that is not governed, controlled by sinful desire, but we should live a life that is holy and pleasing to God. Peter talks about that as well in 2 Peter. But when it comes to preparing in the way that the question was framed, the problem with that is you're living in fear that way. I think that a lot of times when people are thinking about, building bunkers, in their home or stockpiling arsenal and food, I just don't see that anywhere in Scripture as being instruction that is mandated for God's people, because we're not supposed to retreat into our underground bunkers in light of the Lord's return. The Bible tells us to be out on the streets, the highways and the byways, and to announce the good news of Jesus. And so like John the Baptist, we're out in the public calling people to be prepared for the appearing of the Lord. But when it comes to our personal relationship with Jesus, we need to make sure that we are living a life that is consistent with the way of Jesus. John said that whoever has his hope purifies himself as he is pure. But part of that also means that we're on mission, announcing the good news of Jesus to a world that needs Christ.
Mm.
Any thoughts, Bobby?
Yeah, that's well said, John. I think that one aspect is timing of the rapture. So if you're a pre-trib, you believe that that's going to happen at the beginning of the tribulation. And so that raises a whole set of questions, like how do we prepare with a pre-trib worldview? But then if you have a post-tribulation or a mid-trib or a pre-wrath view of the coming of Christ, then that kind of creates a different set of preparation principles. And so one of the aspects, I love the idea of being raptured at the beginning of the tribulation and just kind of taking a hike out of here. That sounds really appealing. my fear, and if that's the only view people hear, and then we find ourselves in the middle of a tribulation era, and all we prepared for was to be out of here. Well, what if the post-tribbers turned out to be right?
Right.
What if the mid-tribbers turned out right? Now, most pre-tribbers would not think that, and most post-tribbers would not think that. But out of this, for the sake of, if that was the case, then it would be like, well, now you got to prepare people on an endurance level for what's going to go down. Now, if you're a pre-wrath person, I kind of want to be like a pre-tribber right now and just hope for that. And if it doesn't work out, then I'm going to make the shift and I'm going to become a pre-wrather. And I'll be like, that's cool. I'm going to get out of here before the wrath. That doesn't work. Then I'm going mid-trib. And then I'm going to be like, okay, well, then it's obviously a post-trib and I'm just going to bunker down.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great point, because I definitely, when I think about questions like this, I come from a position that leans towards a pre-trib rapture.
Yeah.
And my conclusions there wasn't just out of tradition, but I actually had taken the time to read different authors that held to different positions. But I remember reading one book written by a post-trib guy, and his whole book included manuals about how to build bunkers and how to stockpile food and how to prepare for the tribulation. And so, but for me, though, on a theological level, I just didn't find myself leaning in that direction. And so for me, and I'm glad that Bobby brought this out, it's like you're going to generally hear up front a more pre-trib perspective, but I'm glad that you clarified that, because I think that's really helpful, because our audience is so broad, and theologically people are in different places. Yeah.
Thankfully, if we do have to stockpile food, pancakes and breakfast burritos are some of the easiest things to make. So
yeah. I just want to make sure that as believers, because if we're not even talking about the tribulation, I mean, just where the world's at today, and just even thinking about back in Y2K, when everyone thought that once the clocks hit 2000, everything was going to fall apart.
Yeah.
There were so many Christians living in fear, and it was heartbreaking to see so many people living with such high anxiety, because they were just racing to stockpile their bunkers. And during that time, it was heartbreaking to see them living with such fear, but also it was, what kind of a message was that sending to the non-Christians around them?
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that for us, wherever our perspective is, that we live a life that isn't driven by fear. It doesn't mean we can't be practical. Like, living here in Southern California, I think it's a smart thing to have like earthquake preparedness kits and things like that. I think it's good to have an emergency kit in the trunk of your car if you ever break down. But at the same time, there's a common sense element, but not a fear-driven element.
Right. Yeah, no. Well said.
Medina, thanks for sending in your question on facebook.com/pastorsperspective. And before we go to the phones, we'll do another one from Facebook. Ryan in California sent this one in. It's actually two questions. One of them has to do with the end times. Since we already have end times recorded through Revelation, is it possible that anything can be done to thwart the Antichrist and his reign of terror? I know Jesus promises that his coming will not happen until these things come to pass, but given all the scripture we have about end times, couldn't something be done to stop or slow the Antichrist's rise to power? Also, is the Antichrist immortal? Would we be able to identify him before the Great Tribulation period? So that's Ryan's first question. What would you say, Bobby?
Well, I don't think we're going to be able to usurp the plan that's going to unfold as seen in Revelation, because that would imply that Revelation was wrong in its descriptions of what's going to go down. So I think that it's fair to say that we would hold to, Revelation as a canonical book that's authoritative, that teaches us about how the world's going to wrap up. That being said, it doesn't mean that we aren't to partake in spiritual warfare, that we aren't to recognize that our battle's not against flesh and blood. We need to be very proactive in that way in spiritual warfare, because the truth of the matter is, we don't know when this timing is going to come into fruition. And then as it relates to identifying the Antichrist, I don't see that we're going to identify him before he is revealed. What about you, John?
No, I agree. And I think, too, there was an interesting conversation that happened in my in my seminary class on this topic, that it's good to be reminded that Satan doesn't have infinite knowledge. So like he's also guessing too in terms of like how God is going to unfold his plan. So one of the theories is that for every generation, Satan has his man of sin, in the batter's box. And so when you look at the history of the world, there has been Antichrist figures throughout history.
Sure.
And I think that, when you think about the first century, you have the early church looking at someone like Nero saying that guy is the Antichrist. Right. And yet, then you go back further into history, you have Antiochus Epiphanes, and and people are looking at him like this guy is the Antichrist, before that language showed up. but there just seems to be these Antichrist figures through history, but eventually, like you were saying in the book of Revelation, there is this man of sin that is clearly identified. John calls him Antichrist in 1 John 2. Paul calls him man of sin in 2 Thessalonians 2. And whoever that individual is, he's going to be that guy. And but God's prophetic plan and schedule can't be thwarted, like Bobby said, because God is infinite, and when he speaks a prophetic word, it's 100% accurate.
Here's Ryan's other question. When the angel of the Lord appeared to, when Jesus was a baby and the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph, warning him about Herod, how is it that the angel of the Lord, whom we know to be Jesus, was able to appear while Jesus was in his human form, but then Jesus had to be in heaven for the Holy Spirit to roam the planet, as Ryan puts it? What would you guys say about that?
Well, I would just say that angel is lowercase a angel. It's not the appearance of the pre-incarnate God the Son, but it's talking about one of the messengers, the spiritual beings that we read about in the Bible. It was an angel.
Yeah. I can't remember offhand if this is referring at all to the angel of the Lord, because I think John's explanation is exactly right. But even if he's referring to a passage where the definite article precedes angel of the Lord, then we can still answer this question because, again, it's kind of like Jesus has two natures. He's got a human nature and he's got a divine nature. He's got a human nature that's being developed in the womb. He's got this human nature that is formed. So that's not an impossible verse to circumvent. Mm-hmm. The other question is, most people would say that the angel of the Lord is a pre-incarnate snapshot of Christ, but then others might argue on different grounds on that. We have to just be careful that we don't create a quadrinity in the descriptors of the angels. So, John, do you see that passage there that you're referring to?
Yeah, so Matthew 2:13, it says, "Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream." That's
good. And I'm glad we looked that up, because in my brain, I was sitting there going, I don't recall the angel of the Lord even being referred to there at all. And so that's primarily going on in the Old Testament. And so that's where it's important. I mean, think about that, the difference between the definite article or it being a narthrus, that is to say, without the article, whether there's a the or it's an. And so that's that really settles it. Yep. But it's fun, though, just for the thought process. Well, let's just say it was the angel of the Lord. He's assuming a human nature. And so you have things happening like at times, for example, that these situations with Jesus that you're like, well, how's this happening? Yet he's God. Like about him growing in knowledge and wisdom and stature and favor, or him getting hungry, or him taking a siesta. Like, God doesn't need that. Well, it's his human nature. How all that works together is a bit mysterious.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, thanks for sending in your questions on Facebook.com/PastorsPerspective. And the phone lines are open at 888-564-6173. Let's begin with a call from Texas. Hi there, Jade. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective. You're on with Bobby Conway and John Huang.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
So my question is it okay for a Christian to get hypnotized?
Hypnotized. Well, are you asking for yourself or asking for a friend? What?
Actually, for my dad, he has suffered from depression for many, many years, and he's just looking for other options to get healed, I guess.
Wow. Bobby, what would you say?
You know, I personally don't like the idea of being hypnotized because it puts you in a trance-like state if it's effective. And so that's not the kind of state that you want to be in, where you're in a trance because, we want to be taking every thought captive. How can I take every thought captive if I'm in a trance-like state? And so I would exercise caution there, and I would advise against it. If the question's framed, could a person be a Christian and do that? Well, yeah, a Christian could do that. The question is there a better way to go about experiencing some healing in our life for whatever that we're trying to find through hypnotism? And I think, just some, cognitive behavioral therapy, learning how to take every thought captive, learning to address some of our fears. A lot of times people get hypnotized because they're needing to work through certain fears. And so they're trying to, picture themselves in this idealized state. And then, the hypnotist will try to help them to kind of get tranced out, so to speak, so that they can envision being in that state. I remember I was hypnotized when I was younger. I had a shoulder injury, and I went to a hypnotist, and I wasn't a Christian at this time. At least I don't think so. And if I was too early to even be thinking about whether or not is that okay or not. But I found the whole experience rather weird. And for me, as I was laying there, I just remember the lady saying, "Now pitch the ball. Picture yourself throwing a perfect pitch. Picture yourself throwing a strike." And I thought, this is a joke. You got to be kidding me. Hypnotized. So I felt like my parents got ripped off for however much they paid back then. And, I'm strong-willed anyway, so I'm going to go and I'm going to approach that thing, and I'm going to already be resistant to the whole process. You're going to hypnotize me? Yeah, right. So I don't think we should open ourselves up to it either, though.
Yeah. What do you think, Jade, so far?
That's really good. Thank you very much. I'm definitely going to let my dad listen to this.
Okay. Anything to add, John?
No, I think that Bobby's response was great.
Yeah, John was actually in a trance state as I was explaining myself, right?
The thing, when you were talking about pitching the ball, he picked up his little water bottle there. I thought he was going to throw it across the room. But Jade, thanks so much for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective, 888-564-6173. Here's an interesting one. Ron in Arizona wants to know about Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 4, which I had marked in my Bible, and then I flipped the page, and Habakkuk is one of those books that's really hard to find because it's embedded in here somewhere. Ron, what is your question about Habakkuk 3:4?
Okay, good afternoon, pastors.
I found it. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. So what do you want to know, Ron?
Okay, and it goes on to say, before him goes pestilence and plague comes after him. The question is, pastors, are those rays, or could those rays be a weapon of some kind like a laser, and will the pestilence and plague be literal?
You guys ever heard of this, John?
Well, my initial response to this question would be to understand the kind of language that's being spoken in the 3rd chapter of the book of Habakkuk. And so this is poetic language, and so much of what we see in the Hebrew writings here is going to be metaphor that is designed to, promote emotions and feelings about certain things that is being talked about God and about His power and about His glory. Now, that doesn't mean that events are all non-literal. Like, for example, when you read the prophets like Isaiah or Jeremiah, they talk about real events that would happen either in the near future or in the far future, and yet they're using apocalyptic language in order to express either the terror of the Lord, or the judgment that's going to be expressed, or the glory of God that's going to be communicated. And so it could just be here talking about with the brightness like light and his rays flashing from his hand, just a way of communicating his glory, his and his outshining of who he is as a just and holy God. And so that would be my initial way of understanding this passage.
I love the way you use the phrase outshining. That's a really cool description. It's also in the Hebrew, the word for rays in the Hebrew can mean horns. So interestingly enough, it was Michelangelo that depicted Moses in his sculpture with horns. Wow. So if you Google Michelangelo, his sculpture of Moses, you'll see horns coming off of Moses' head. And what influenced Michelangelo was Habakkuk 3:4. And it's also the same, phraseology, these horns, that when Moses came down from the mountain and his countenance, was so glorious that they, found themselves like, hey, cover yourselves, right? We put a bag over his head. I mean, imagine like going to Vaughn's and get some grocery shopping, and you're there, and the horns, the radiance, the glory of God was so shining. People are like, here's a paper bag, put that over your head, and then just kind of walk around the store. But nevertheless, I mean, this is a judgment passage. I mean, God's going to judge people. That's Habakkuk's consternation. I mean, you've got these prayers of Habakkuk followed by God's answers that he is going to bring the Babylonians in, and God's people are going into judgment, and it's going to happen. Now, nevertheless, these rays coming out from his hand then is concealing and revealing. And so, as John said, this outshining, and I feel like in the context of this is a judgment passage, but it's also depicting God's glory.
Ron, thanks for your question. Here's another one from Facebook really quick, because it kind of ties in. Bobby, you mentioned that the word raise in Hebrew, what the word is. Kathy and Paul want to know, if we're really attempting to read our Bible with careful consideration, is it important to understand the Greek and Hebrew meaning of words? So as we study the Bible, how much would you say we should at least have an introductory lesson in Greek or Hebrew?
Well, I mean, I think that it depends on what your calling is going to be. I mean, here's the nice thing. We have so many tools that are accessible to us that, yes, I think for teachers, for them to at least know that these tools are available to them and to have the awareness of how to access them can be important. But I don't think teachers need to feel the burden that they got to learn Hebrew and they have to learn Greek. And honestly, the people that really know their Hebrew and Greek, they give their life to this. So like even when you hear us talking on the radio show, we might have some skills to be able to track down a word or open that up. But if you're just going to sit there and read the Hebrew text and the Greek text, I mean, I had 3.5 years of Greek. I've had a couple years of Hebrew, and I'm not just picking that thing up and opening it and reading it. But it's helpful to have tools like Logos, Bible software, where I could open it up and I can kind of find my way in and go, oh, that's interesting, and here's what the word is. So I think that's what I'd say. I think what's really important, though, for the beginning Bible student is I think churches would be wise to incorporate a Bible study methods crash course for their congregants, because what happens? We become Christians and we're told, yeah, go read the Bible. But if we have some basic tools for how to read the Bible, that can enrich our discipleship process.
Yeah.
You're the king of the crash courses, so is that going to be your next one that you put on your website?
Hey, you know what? That would be a fun crash course. And now that you say that, maybe I will develop a Bible study methods crash course.
Tim.
Yes, we need
gotta
to
get
do a
Tim.
Bible study methods crash course, Tim.
Yes, Tim is out there somewhere. I think he's still taking pictures of the radio station or something. He wants to start his own station in North Carolina. But
Yes.
Kathy and Paul, thanks for sending in your question today on Facebook.com/pastorsperspective. And let's go to, wait, weren't we just talking to Ron? Oh, no, that was Ron in Arizona. Here's Ron in California. Hey, Ron, how can we help you?
Yeah, I have a question. My grandson, when he prays, after this prayer, he gives a sign of the cross. And he wants to know if his mom gets mad at him because he does that, But I just say, you know what, there's really no significance in it. The power is in the prayer, not the sign of the cross. The sign of the cross is like, to me, it's no more than shaking somebody's hand when you're done with your prayer. But he says that he does the sign of the cross to complete his prayer. And I just want to, see if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or it doesn't matter.
How old is he, Ron?
He's 21.
21. Did he grow up Catholic or?
No, not really.
Really?
Basically, they kind of grew up with nothing really, more towards the Christianity. But I think a lot of his friends are Catholic, and they do that.
That could be it. John, what would you say?
Well, I think for a lot of young people, it's more of a learned behavior, especially for the way that you described your son that really didn't have a religious upbringing. I know that there are a lot of young people that are really drawn toward a high church liturgical form of expressing their worship of God, and there's just something that they see as being sacred in having some kind of form like this. Now, obviously, you're not going to find, making the sign of the cross in the New Testament attached to prayer, but this is something that has been developed throughout church history, and for a lot of Christians, like you said, this is a way that they feel like they're going to finish their prayers. I would just hope that your son, as he continues in his spiritual journey, will just continue to learn more about who Jesus is, about what a relationship with Christ looks like. Because a lot of times where we start in our spiritual journey isn't where we end up. And so he's on this journey where he's going to be growing as a Christian, and he's going to be discovering new things as he's maturing in Christ. And there may come a point where he just realizes, gosh, you know what? Making the sign of the cross really isn't that significant in terms of God's going to listen to me or not. But understanding that it's the person of Jesus Christ himself that is the one who connects us with the Father. Bobby?
Yeah, that's really good. I do think it's pretty cool when there is some of the symbolism, as long as you're not thinking you're going to gain salvation. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't make the sign of the cross, but I think there is beauty sometimes in some of the forms. So I think about walking through the Roman catacombs and how cool it was to be down there and seeing symbols of the fish that they would draw. Well, that drawing that symbol did not make them a Christian. Rather, it was an expression of Christ who already counted them as one. I think that you mentioned, Brian, did you grow up Catholic here? Is this what's going on? Because typically that's something that goes on in Catholicism. And what can happen is Protestants can then react against that. Oh goodness, Catholics, they kind of do the sign of the cross, so that's got to be something we can't do. And I would say, well, if you genuinely stop and think about it, if you're praying and you just want to make the sign of the cross, and if what that represents is, hey, in my heart, Jesus, you laid down your life for me, I want to just lay down my rights for you today. Then you can see how that could be a beautiful reminder. There was a time even in my own life, like where images, for example, there were these iconoclastic controversies that went down throughout church history. You have the Eastern Orthodox Church, and then you have Protestants, and you get these different opinions on whether or not you can use icons where the Greek Orthodox Church and Eastern Orthodoxy, they're going to be open to this kind of stuff, right? But then others are going to get real resistant. And so our understanding of that, well, all that to say, you might find some of the stuff is suitable for you at one stage of your life. At another stage, it's not as meaningful.
Yeah.
And that's just part of our deeper sanctification.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think of even baseball players sometimes. They'll hit a home run, they cross the plate, they do the sign of the cross, and yeah, some Christians might look at that, oh, he's a Catholic. But it's like, you know what? At least he's praising the Lord for what just happened. So,
right.
Think of it that way. So, Ron, thanks for your call. We got to take a break here now on the Pastor's Perspective program. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Give us a call at 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. Bobby Conway and John Huang answering your questions today till 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 888-564-6173. We are back on the Pastor's Perspective program. Thank you so much for listening to us on the radio or on a podcast or for watching us on Facebook or YouTube. The number to call with your question is 888-564-6173. It's there at the bottom of your screen if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube. Answering your questions today, author and apologist Dr. Bobby Conway from the 1 Minute Apologist channel on YouTube, and John Huang, one of the assistant pastors at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California, also the director of the Calvary Chapel Bible College in Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and let's open up the phone lines now. Well, we've actually had the phone lines open for about half an hour. Let's go to the phone lines, and we're going to begin this segment with Sonia in California. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Sonia.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hi. So my husband and I were watching this program, and this woman was talking about her recovery from addiction, and she kept referring to her addiction as a disease. So this prompted a discussion between the two of us concerning addiction, whether it is it a disease or is it a choice we make? So we'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Bobby, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, opinions do vary as it relates to alcohol and its effect. There is obviously a choice component that's engaged with alcohol. I think that the idea of a disease, let me define an alcoholic. And I'm defining an alcoholic as one who is an alcoholic. And it is one who obsesses about alcohol and experiences the phenomenon of crave once they take a sip. So by that, the phenomenon of crave kicks into an alcoholic, and it's what has them continuing to drink more and more and more. So a lot of people can have a glass of wine and they, enjoy it sip by sip. And the alcoholic head isn't quite like this. Like when I'm observing people in their drinking patterns in restaurants, I'm always amazed at the person who just gets up after being there for an hour and leaves 3/4 of their beer. That doesn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. In a bad alcoholic state, I'd go over and finish it for them. I mean, it's kind of like the phenomenon of crave kicks in. So here's, I think, the choice can go away after the first sip. In particular, because once that phenomenon of crave kicks in, you can be in this place where you don't even realize what's happening. Like, I have found myself completely inebriated and did not realize how it even happened. Had no intention for this to happen, and found myself going, how in the world did this happen? Where I'm completely inebriated, falling on my face, and crashing out at 2 a.m, and then waking up at 6 a.m, 4 hours later, looking for the bottle to finish off. Okay, that's alcoholism. That's not the way a normal person drinks. There's something broken inside of some people's relationship to alcohol. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to alcohol being a disease, there is nobody I've ever met that's a true alcoholic that struggles with the thought of alcoholism being a real disease. It's typically those who aren't alcoholics struggling to wrap their head around the relationship that they have with alcohol and making sense of it. But like when I talk to somebody and they're like using the reference of a disease, it makes perfect sense to me. And it makes perfect sense to all the people that I know that are alcoholics. But those even, there are people who drink heavy, like in college. I had a lot of these types of friends. They could go to college, they could drink heavy and be done. So what can happen is people that drank heavy in college and then they just stop. Well, they could look and go, well, I just stopped. Mm-hmm. What's happening? There is a certain kind of hard drinker that can drink hard, but given a good enough reason to stop, getting married, having a family, a conversion, they can be motivated and stop all at once. Yeah. But then there's the real alcoholic that's been licked, that they might not even drink as hard as the alcoholic. It's just once they start, the phenomenon of crave kicks in, mm-hmm. and it gets pretty ugly from there. So for me, I think that the choice is not to take that first sip. And that's, for me, where I feel like I sin. If I take a sip, then I just, like I really do. Like, and some people say, oh, you're just living in fear. And I go, well, you're probably not an alcoholic if you're saying that. Because an alcoholic, I genuinely think I'll destroy my life if I take a sip, because it doesn't stop there.
Yeah. What do you think, Sonia?
Yeah, I understand that. I don't have, never had an addiction to alcohol or drugs. But there are other addictions. Food is one. And so it's a struggle I have. But I consider it a choice. If I'm overweight, it's because, and I'm not eating healthy, then that's my choice. Now, if I'm overweight and I'm doing everything I can, I'm eating healthy and I'm exercising, well, then there's probably a medical issue, something wrong that I need to address. But again, going back to the first option, if I'm complaining about being overweight, and maybe that's not the right word, complaining, but if I'm overweight and I just can't say no to that cookie, or I can't say no to that hamburger, fast food hamburger, I see that as a choice.
Yeah, you just don't get high off of food, though. And so I don't know if you've ever snorted a line or, injected heroin or been inebriated or taken any of these other types of drugs. There's all kinds of them, opioids, alcoholics, or drug addicts for that matter. I think it gives them a feeling. and they're trying to intensify that feeling, and they're looking for the perfect high. So it's like, well, if I'm eating ice cream and I love it, it's like measuring that perfect amount. I'll stop here. I'm satisfied.
Right.
You're looking for that perfect high, and
Maybe
then
it's
the
not
more
a
you
high
drink, the more messed up you get in your ability to discern through it. So I just don't see that as the same. I don't care if you call it a disease or not. I mean, I just call it whatever. It's just there's something broken in an alcoholic's brain as it relates to alcohol.
I'm thinking maybe, and I don't know, but maybe it's not in the sense of a high as you would experience with drugs or alcohol, but maybe it's just the pleasure. Maybe it's just the idea of, oh, this tastes so good, and just wanting more and more. I don't know. I don't know. Anything to add, John?
No, I think this whole conversation is fascinating. I'm just curious, Bobby, because you're not just an apologist, you're also a pastor. So for the person that's listening to this program and says, man, I do struggle with alcoholism, and I don't want to continue down this path. As a pastor, what would you tell that person?
Yeah, I think that, you've got to recognize, first off, that you've got a problem. So a lot of people with addictions stay in denial, and the reason they stay in denial is because it means that I have to give something up, and giving something up is really, really hard to do. And so I think that we have to listen to what are people around us saying about this? What are the consequences that are happening in my life? Where's this going to go if I keep this up? And I would say then we got to vision what a life would be like without this. Like, what if I could have peace going out into this world? A lot of people that are alcoholics struggle with anxiety disorders and depression and so on. What would it look like for me to be able to engage this world and be freed of it? And if you genuinely can recognize that you want help, then I would say go to a Celebrate Recovery in a church where there's Christ-centered recovery groups, and it may even be worth looking at going to treatment, depending upon how bad off you are. Sometimes people just need some time to be really quarantined. But really the whole disease debate, though, I don't care if you call it a disease or not. I get that people go, oh, this is let's just remove the word disease. There's just something really funky that goes on in a brain that's an addict. And I think that that's the thing, that there's something that's different. And we can't impose our brain state on other people's brain states. It's like me looking at an anorexic, like the anorexic feels like they're overweight. I'm like, and I could just say, just eat something. You're not overweight. What's the big deal? Well, that person brain is broken in relationship to how they perceive themselves. Whether I can grasp it or not, there's something deep going on here. So call it a mental health crisis with alcohol, that your brain just crashes when it comes to alcohol. If you don't want to call it a disease, there are people that have some real mental issues around alcohol. It gets twisted, just as there's people that have real mental health issues as it relates to food. And I think that could be a way to navigate it. And then again, I would say to the drug addicts out there, get help. I mean, I'm fortunate. Like I don't consider myself a recovering drug addict. I used a lot of drugs in the past, but I mean, there's stuff that these kids get on with opioids and the heroin and stuff that's just crushing for them, and they just need hope.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Great.
Sonia, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective, 888-564-6173. Brian Perez here with Bobby Conway and John Huang. And earlier today, we had a question about hypnotism. And John Mark kind of has a follow-up question, or a similar question. I don't know if it's a follow-up necessarily. John Mark, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for taking my calls, pastors. I really appreciate what you do and help other people and bring people to Christ. Thank you so much.
Thank you, bro.
So my question, sir, is I like this show. I used to watch this show a lot in the it's from the late 80s. I don't know if you guys know. It's called Unsolved Mysteries with host Robert Stack.
Yes.
And I love this show. I grew up with it. But anyway, there was an episode of the show, sir, where there was this woman that was from New York, and she got this actually, I'm not sure if she was from New York. I don't know where she was, but she got a vision about she heard on the radio that the police were searching for this woman. She disappeared. They couldn't find her. It was back in the 50s. And she had a vision of this woman lying down in a mountain in her nurse uniform, because she was a nurse, And she said, I know where this girl is. So she drove with her daughter to this location, and there, lo and behold, there was the girl. She went to the police station, told the police. The police said, how do you know this much details? They arrested her.
Oh, my.
Well, they found out that she wasn't involved, but she said later that she was a psychic. Well, my question is could this be like, you know how the gifts of the Spirit, one of them is discernment, one of them is the gift of knowledge. Could God give someone that gift to bring closure to the family, or is that like the devil, angel of light thing?
Wow.
That's not my question, Serge.
Yeah, good question. John, what would you say?
Well, I think that there's different ways that you could answer that question. The one thing I would say, though, is if we're talking about a non-Christian psychic, then we're talking about someone that does not have the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit. And so, so to talk about that individual exercising that spiritual gift of discernment, the discerning of spirits that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 12, it really doesn't apply. It doesn't mean that God can't use non-Christians for his purposes, but in this case, it's not this exercising of a spiritual gift as someone who is indwelt and filled with the Holy Spirit. Now, I believe that there is a real demonic world. I believe that there is real supernatural things that happen. And one of the things about demons is because they are present in the world, it wouldn't surprise me for demons to be aware and informed of stuff that happens in the past or in the present. Where God sets himself apart from all the idols in the book of Isaiah is when he starts talking about the future. And again, this is something that only God is able to do. And this is why prophecy is such a powerful testimony to the credibility of the Scriptures, as Peter talks about, that we have the more sure word, that prophetic word. So demons are observing all the time. And so for them to know what happened in the past or in the present, that shouldn't surprise us the same way as humans. If we're in a location where an accident happened or a crime happened, we're able to say, hey, I saw something in the past, I see something that's happening in the present. But if you were to ask me what's going to happen in the future with precision detail, I wouldn't be able to tell you that. No demon's going to be able to tell you that. Satan's not going to be able to tell you that unless it's something that they're wanting to manipulate in their own actions. But ultimately, when it comes to the future, God says, this is the way that I'm going to show you that I set myself apart from these idols. And so in this kind of situation, again, I don't know in terms of all the details that went into it, but if there was demonic activity happening, it wouldn't shock me, it wouldn't surprise me that they would know the details of a past crime.
John Mark, does that help you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I figured that because I know it says that the devil comes as an angel of light, and I could see how it could take people's eyes away from the Lord, and that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. Did you want to add something, Bobby, to what John said?
No, I think that was a great, well-rounded answer.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a brief comment. I noticed that we had a caller that called in for a moment and then dropped the call.
Yes.
And the question that came up was interesting, like, how can somebody be an alcoholic or a drug addict if they arrive there because of decisions that they choose to make early on? And I think one way of looking at it, too, is aren't there people like that you just immediately know that, they're 15 or 16 or 17 years old, they're off to the races with something, and it's not like, you just don't have the same brains. So, I mean, it's like I think about the crowds that I hung in. There were people at parties all the time that I was at as a kid. And I suppose that the question that was asked, well, wasn't it just my own choices or whatever? I go, I don't know how to explain it, but I was a teenager and I was literally going around the corner, and I would stick my finger down my throat and throw myself up so that I could keep drinking. Like, that wasn't normal. And people go, oh, this is just your evil choices. I'm going, there was something that just from that first sip, and you start taking that, and I think that the experience of the alcoholic and for drug addicts. So I think once again, it doesn't have to be called a disease. It can be a brain is just kind of broken in their relationship to these things, because there are plenty of people that, hey, they can take it or leave it. They have a beer, and it's not because they have like this great willpower and these other people don't. I think that there's something that's going on chemically, I think, as well. For me, let's say, with all the anxiety that was roaring through me, you take somebody that doesn't struggle with anxiety disorder, for example, and they have a beer. Okay, well, that's great. I can take it or leave it. I'm not feeling anxious anyway. Well, imagine a 16-year-old that's got raging anxiety, and now they get a beer, and it's like, oh my goodness, that feels I feel a little bit better. I'd like to have this feel a little bit better. Yeah. And now this emotion of anxiety that's just been crushing you is being pushed to the background. And all of a sudden you're feeling normal for once. And I think that there's a lot of people out there with alcoholism and drug addiction that could be driving right now in their cars. And if they look back, it wasn't because they were setting out to have these terrible choices to be these bad people. They look back and they go, man, I was so depressed, or I was so anxious. And I started getting into this lifestyle because for once in my life, I felt like I could live and not be so anxious and depressed. Now, I'd imagine someone else would call and say, yeah, but weren't you anxious because of sin? And weren't you depressed because these are kids. They're not necessarily, I think sometimes we can't assume everybody's brain's the same way. And that's where like Dr. Amen right around the corner at the clinic, they got all these different types of ADD people that they do these brain scans, and you can see the brain scans where it's really red and they're just hijacked brains, traumatized. And so I just feel like it was worth sharing a little bit more I think that there needs to be a lot of empathy in this arena, but that doesn't mean like empathy, like, let's just sit around and just have a free pass to drunkenness. Right. Like by no means. Like what am I saying? I'm saying it's more cost. Like I sin with the first sip. So I'm putting more accountability on my life by saying I can't even have a sip. I'm recognizing that I need to abstain completely. Yeah. Where others can enjoy and partake.
I think what it is, too, is in the church especially, and I'm not saying this is the case with the person who called in, but there seems to be because I've never had a problem with drinking, and I see somebody else that did have a problem with drinking, they're just messed up because I never had a problem. Why do they have a problem? Or even if I did have a problem, but I got over it, they should be able to get over it, too. Yeah. So it's just judgmental type of attitude, like, come on, get over it. Like what you said about, an anorexic person. Just eat something. It's something deeper.
It's like the mom and dad. Remember like the Growing Kids God Ways series that was out years ago, or there's parenting book series that come out. And it's typically the young couple. They're freshly married. They're going to have a baby. They've read this parenting book. And they just look at other parents that have dysfunctional kids and think, well, they just need to get a hold of this book. And if they'll just follow these principles, they'll be okay. Yeah. Well, then the parent starts having multiple kids, and you start going, hey, we're the same parents. And what is it that I have one child that's really struggling with, call it X, while my other kids don't? Yeah. It's because we're different. And we have to realize that. We tend to think we all have the same brain state, and we all have the same look at the world, and we all have the same kind of a start. Well, no, our fallen nature affects some of us differently depending upon all kinds of genetics, background, experiences, parenting. We are conditioned by a lot.
Yeah, that's so good, Bobby.
All right, 888-564-6173. A reminder, tomorrow is 2-Hour Thursday. We're going to have Lou Wing talking about the COVID and the COVID vaccine during the first hour of the program. And then the second hour, Phil Metzger from Calvary San Diego will be joining Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway once again. Right now, though, we've got time for some more calls, at least one more. Here's Debbie in Joyzy. Welcome to the program, Debbie.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I've been walking with the Lord for 15 years. I feel like I should know this answer, but I think I may have a little dilemma going on. The church that I'm in right now, there's quite a few people that believe in the Word of Faith movement, and it didn't bother me. My pastor has his messages are solid, and he doesn't lean towards that Word of Faith. But now they have a life group starting, and the people that are running the life group are doing a book that is a Word of Faith teacher, and I'm not going to mention his name. And so I brought this up to the pastor because I don't think that's right. I'm concerned. And he said that he spoke to them, and the couple said that, well, it's a straightforward book, and it really doesn't get into any of his controversial theology. And then he said, maybe you want to have a dialogue with this couple, and I feel like, no, I don't, because this is what they believe, and they're not going to change their mind about it. Mm-hmm. But my dilemma is, is this something like that I have to leave the church? Because it's not. I just don't think it's good, to be,
Yeah, John Huang, what would you tell Debbie?
Well, I would encourage you to have that dialogue. I mean, if God opens up an opportunity for you to just be able to talk through stuff, and especially your concerns, I would encourage you to do that. And the reason why I say this is, it's interesting. I'm a part of a seminary cohort, and there is a group of wonderful, wonderful Christian people from Oklahoma that come out, and they're a part of our school. But the thing that was really fascinating is they are a church that would consider themselves Word of Faith. And so I had this typical stereotype in my mind of what all Word of Faith churches are like. But one of the things I discovered about this group of believers and their leaders of this church is they are so orthodox. They're grounded in their belief about Christ, about salvation. There's nothing weird. There's no disagreements in terms of how we think about God and the Bible and faith. And even the way they talk about Word of Faith just goes against the grain of our stereotypes. And for them, as they're seeking to understand, the scriptures, for them, Word of Faith is that when they pray, they just want to believe that God can heal, that God can do miracles, that God can come in without compromising the reality that God's going to do things according to His perfect will. Now, that may, for a lot of people, say, well, that's not the traditional Word of Faith, but these guys would consider themselves as a traditional Word of Faith. And so one of the things that I discovered is that even with categories, there is a broad spectrum. And what I don't want to do is divide the body of Christ over what my stereotype is of an individual that I don't actually engage in dialogue to really understand where do they stand theologically about the core beliefs that we hold on to as believers. And, they may have different ways of understanding prayer. And yet, at the same time, I would dare to say that we agree more on how we think about prayer. We just may not, agree in everything about certain things. So I would just say, have that conversation, be open to listen, but if at any point there is a push away from what are the core doctrines of the Christian faith, that's when you need to walk away.
Debbie, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective, and that is all the time we have on today's program. Sorry that we couldn't get to your call, but we're going to be here tomorrow, so give us a call first hour. Like I said, we'll be talking about COVID and the vaccine and all that other stuff with Dr. Lou Wing. He's going to be in the studio with us tomorrow. And then the second hour, that's when you can call in with all your other questions at 888-564-6173, but not now because the program is over. We will talk to you tomorrow. For Bobby Conway and John Huang, I'm Brian Perez. Have a good evening. God bless you guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting us and praying for us. Pastor's Perspective is sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.